About 4 a.m. on February 24th of 2022, the Russian army began an offensive on Ukrainian territory. It was carried out in several directions at once, from the south, east, and the north. However, it was in the south where it seemed easier for the Ukrainians to hold the narrow isthmuses of Crimea that the Russian offensive achieved its greatest success. Why this happened is still not known for certain. A few hours after the start of the invasion from the territory of occupied Crimea, Russian military columns were able to reach Kherson and Novaya Kakhovka, that is, to penetrate 60 to 80 kilometers into the rear. In parallel, the Russian army developed an offensive to the east, where already in late February to early March of 2022, it was able to capture such large cities as Berdyansk, Melitopol, Urnogrodar, and the nearby Zaporizhia nuclear power plant.
Russian troops continue to advance and reinforce into Ukraine. This is a unique sight, a Russian naval armada at a port which Ukrainian troops had abandoned without a fight, leaving its facilities entirely intact.
Then began a long and bloody siege of Mariupol, which was captured in mid-May. 3 years into a full-scale war, it is the territorial gains in southern Ukraine that remain the Kremlin's greatest achievement and one of the most mysterious pages of the conflict. Neither the political nor the military leadership of Ukraine can give a comprehensive answer to the question of why the failure occurred in the south,
which has allowed Russia's Black Sea Fleet and the Orsk landing ship to stage this operation.
This gives rise to myths and speculation. Based on an article and a unique report from BBC Russian service, they have identified 4 main questions about what happened in the south of Ukraine in 2022 and have tried to answer them.
Transport troops and heavy equipment. It can fit as many as 20 tanks or 40 armored personnel carriers, along with hundreds upon hundreds of troops.
So my friends, today is another unique video. We will look back into the past of the Ukraine war and try to analyze how the Russians were able to take the land bridge from Crimea to Donetsk in such rapid fashion with little resistance. Now, as you all know, this is a new channel, an offshoot from an older channel which got demonetized, but which was growing quite rapidly. So I have tried to revamp my channel membership on this channel, and the membership is also growing fairly rapidly. And now I'll give a quick shout out to my newest channel members. I do ask that you continue to support this channel with super thanks donations or donations to my PayPal account, but most of all, if you could consider joining the channel membership, where I have lots of long-form content analysis that is not in the YouTube algorithm, as well as combat footage and other clips of speeches that you won't find in the mainstream media. A lot of my members find a lot of value in this membership program, and therefore it is considered one of the best ways to support alternative media like mine. So with that aside, let's get back into today's video. The Crimean isthmuses, which connect the peninsula with mainland Ukraine, have only 2 roads leading from Armyansk through Perekop to Chaplinka and Kalanchak, as well as 5 main bridge crossings. We are talking about the old and new automobile bridges directly on Chonga, the railway crossing on the dam up to the west across the Sivash, as well as 2 spans of the automobile and old railway bridge from the Arabat Spit towards Genichesk. There are also several more strong dams across the lakes that enter the so-called Rotten Sea, the shallow Sivash Bay, which is most often called Lake Sivash. The Ukrainian military command claims that all 5 bridges were mined, and minefields were laid on the way to Kalanchak and Chaplinka back in 2014. According to the former commander of the Joint Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Serhiy Nayev, who held his position from March 2020 to February 2024, and is now the commander of a tactical group at the front, the bridges were mined using a surface charge, that is, the explosives were attached to the surface and about 1,500 mines were laid on land areas. However, according to him, in the conditions of full-scale military aggression, this number of mines was not enough. In general, to repel aggression, there should have been more than 200,000 mines there, the general said in an interview with Ukrainska Pravda on February 10th of 2025. In addition to bridges and the Perakop Isthmus, numerous embankments in the Sivash Bay were also mined. Former Marine Battalion fighter Leonid Budanich, who served on combat duty on the border with Crimea several times from 2017 to 2020, told the BBC. He says that defensive positions and observation posts were prepared in the area, and the serviceability of explosive barriers was constantly checked, especially during the rotation of units. That is, when you accept an object, you immediately check the explosives, the integrity of the cables, because now this is your responsibility, explains the former Marine. He recalls only one case where problems with mining were discovered. It happened on the Kutaran Dam, which separates Lake Lemuria and the Sivash Bay itself. In quotations, we took a shovel and went to dig up boxes of explosives. Some boxes were empty, and some were missing half of the explosives, he said. The required amount of explosives was restored, and the incident was reported to the SBU. Bunanich does not rule out that the Russian sabotage groups could have tried to damage explosive barriers on the border with Crimea, but emphasizes that much depended on the professionalism and vigilance of the Ukrainian units that served on the Crimean isthmuses. In quotations, compared to the ATO, or the anti-terrorist operation, combat duty near Crimea was like a vacation. Did all units take their duties seriously while serving in the area? The ex-Marine asks rhetorically. In quotations, if the crossings from Crimea had been blown up and the first hours had developed a little differently, then it is clear that the Russian army would not have been able to move at such a speed. This is an axiom, emphasized the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirill Budanov, in August of 2023. If the bridges, dams, and passages from Crimea were mined, then why weren't they blown up? General Sergei Nayev assures that on February 23rd of 2022, he gave the order to pull all explosive barriers on alert number 1. And in fact, some of them were still blown up during the Russian offensive. He says that there was an explosion of the railway bridge on Chonga and an explosion of the road bridge on the Arabat Spit. On Arabatka, the bridge was blown up at the cost of his own life by hero of Ukraine, Vitaly Skakun. His comrades recall that on the morning of February 24th, after the order to detonate, Ukrainian fighters managed to deliver 2 trailers with cumulative charges, each containing about a ton of explosive, to the bridges near Genichesk. In quotations, we connected everything, pressed the detonation button, but it did not detonate. We tried a second, third time. Nothing worked, recalled Marine and fellow serviceman of Vitaly Skakun, Alexander Kach, in an interview in February of 2024. They checked the wires, made more and more attempts, but there was no explosion. And then Vitaly Skakun picked up the explosive device and ran with it to the bridge. A minute later, there was an explosion. The fighter died. It was later revealed that the explosion had destroyed only one half of the bridge. This delayed the Russian advance, but it did not stop it. Apart from Nayev's recent words, nothing else is known about the explosion of the railway bridge on Chonga. Ivan Sestrivatsky, a soldier from the Marine Battalion who was supposed to blow up the bridges on the Chonga Peninsula, spoke to journalists for the first time in July of 2023 and said that he tried to blow up the bridges 3 times, connected and reconnected the wires, but the explosion never happened. In quotations, "I'm not a sapper, but there are 2 options. Either a sabotage group was deployed or the detonation wires were damaged by mortar fire," the fighter said at the time. The minefields near the roads to Chaplinka and Kalanchak also did not work. Former commander of the Operational Command South, Andrei Sokolov, in 2021 to 2022, commander of the Operational Command South, and now commander of the Tactical Group, back in 2023, assumed that the Russians were able to clear these fields of mines with artillery fire, but the Ukrainian armed forces never received an order to mine the roads on the isthmus directly before the Russians' offensive. Ukrainian military correspondent Yuri Butusov says that, in addition to the bridge on the Arabat Spit, there was also an explosion on the Kutar Dam on the morning of February 2024. Two Russian infantry fighting vehicles were blown up by landmines. There is no official information about this explosion. Military officer Leonid Budanich confirms that this dam was mined. Why, in most cases, did the explosive barriers installed on the isthmuses fail to work the first time or fail to explode at all? In addition to possible damage to wires and the work of Russian sabotage groups, General Sergei Nayev also draws attention to the grave psycho-emotional state of the Ukrainian military. They had to carry out the explosions under fire. In quotations, "We must understand that military tasks during a war are not all completed immediately and 100%, he added. Back in April of 2022, commenting on the failure in the south, the press service of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine noted that the number of Russian troops there exceeded the Ukrainians by 15 times. The former commander of the south, Sokolov, speaks of a 20 to 25 times advantage. According to him, 25 battalion tactical groups of the Russian Federation, that is, up to 20,000 people, were advancing from Crimea to mainland Ukraine. At the same time, the isthmuses in the Crimean direction were defended by only one Ukrainian Marine battalion, numbering about 250 people, and a small force of border guards. In addition, a significant portion of the Marines were inexperienced conscripts. They were not supposed to take the fight directly to the defensive positions on the Crimean isthmuses. One of the Marines who witnessed the full-scale invasion on Changa told the BBC Ukrainian service. "In case of a breakthrough, we had clear instructions. Blow up the bridges and retreat to prepare defensive lines deep into the territory," he said. The 59th Motorized Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces was supposed to come to the aid, but did not have time to leave the training ground near the Oleshkovsky Sands. This is 60 kilometers from the administrative border with Crimea. In addition, one of its most combat-ready battalions was sent to defend Melitopol, which turned out to be completely unprotected. In such conditions, the Ukrainian troops managed to engage the first battles with the enemy only on the approaches to the Dnieper, near the Antonovsky Bridge. However, given that at the time, the Russians had already managed to capture Novaya Kakhovka and cross the right bank of the Kherson region, the retreat of the Ukrainian armed forces deep into the territory on the right bank was inevitable, otherwise significant forces would have been surrounded. Only about 1,500 Ukrainian armed forces servicemen could resist the Russian invasion of the left bank of the Kherson region, which was clearly not enough, especially since Russia was advancing in three directions at once: Kherson, Nova Kakhovka, and Melitopol. According to the defense plan, the section of the front was to be held by at least 4 brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces, that is, up to 12 to 16,000 fighters. But according to the Ukrainian command, it was not possible to send these forces to the southern direction. The chief advisor to the then commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Valery Zaluzny, General Viktor Nazarov, he was the chief advisor and then consultant to the commander-in-chief from August 2021 to February 2024, explained to the BBC in a recent interview that the 24 ground forces brigades that were in combat strength at the time, half were deployed to the eastern front, and the remaining 12 brigades had to be dispersed to defend Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, and the entire southern direction. This is a point I have repeatedly made about the initial invasion of the Russian army into Ukraine in 2022. I thought it was a clever plan where they attacked everywhere at once and forced the Ukrainian defense forces to have to split up their army to defend multiple areas, many of which were just feints, and therefore permitted easy access to the main strike group of the Russian armed forces to enter Crimea and create a land bridge. And therefore, I continuously repeat, the main effort of the initial strike from the Russian army was not Kiev. Kiev was a fixing operation and a diplomatic tool to force Ukraine into peace negotiations. The main strike was always in the south, the land bridge, which, even up to today, is the greatest strategic victory for Russia and the greatest strategic defeat for Ukraine and the West. Everything else, all the narrative about the Russian invasion being a debacle or disaster, is pure coup and propaganda.
не пытаемся завоевать Украину. Мы не пытаемся лишить их государственности. Мы не пытаемся лишить их суверенитета как такового, хотя у них его никакого нет. Мы не пытаемся завоевать Западную Европу. Мы проводим полицейскую операцию по принуждению к миру. Что ясно и с количеством войск, которые... Мы объясняем, почему мы идем именно таким путем. Что это было связано исключительно... Владимир Владимирович очень подробно на эту тему объяснил. Просто каждый шаг. Для чего? Чтобы разбить ложь Запада.
On the other hand, the Crimean Isthmus is the narrowest point of the front through which Russian troops entered. It was here that since 2014, Ukrainian military and security forces were trained to repel a potential enemy invasion from this direction. In particular, this is stated in the book Combat Chronicles of 2022, the authors of which are military historians Andrei Karuk and Mikhail Zirokov. In quotations, Russian troops entered mainland Ukraine from Crimea through a narrow passage that could be relatively easily blocked. In previous years, the Ukrainian armed forces had repeatedly conducted corresponding exercises. However, at the most crucial moment, the plan to block the exits from Crimea was simply not put in action.
Ukraine is we need to bring that war to a close because all Ukraine is doing now is destroying itself demographically. They're chewing up the next generation of manpower that they can't really replace right now. They don't have enough manpower. The Western defense base is pathetic, and you're not going to out-conventional war the Russian bear. And I would say a ugly peace is better than whatever their idea of an ideal war is.